Hey, why are you running Grace? What about Yanagi? Does Yanagi work here? I want to run Yanagi, I don't have Grace. Can I run Harumasa with Yanagi? Why are you using Grace? She's terrible. Actually, Grace is better. Put 60 asterisks on that better. Hello. I wanted to make this video to talk about the Shock team again for Harumasa. This time it's a bit different though. I want to talk about teammate options, specifically for the anomaly slot. As you know, I am a big Grace fan. I'm basically always playing Shock-Harumasa with Grace as opposed to Yanagi, which is the other option. There's a couple of reasons for this. Aside from obvious gameplay differences between the two, and just damage differences, there's a couple reasons that I tend to prefer Grace over Yanagi. It's not necessarily that Grace is better just outright. It's a bunch of different like gameplay differences and in general synergies that I tend to prefer for the Grace variant. Right, so before we get into that, I want to first explain what each of these characters do. So, I mean, for those who aren't super familiar with Yanagi and Grace, Yanagi came out in version 1.3 together with somebody. Who was in 1.3? Was it Lighter? I think it was Lighter, yeah. And Yanagi is an electric anomaly character that is focused on doing her own personal damage. She is a carry, for the most part. She is designed to do a shit ton of damage with her polarity disorders. Now, what are her polarity disorders? Her polarity disorders, I'm not saying that again, are basically these unique disorders that she is able to proc on any anomaly no matter what, that scale off of her own AP that is shown in her skills, and it does a shit ton of damage basically. She does not need a different anomaly from her own to do this. She can do it with her very own shock, making it so she can basically turn any team into a disorder team. Now Yanagi can trigger polarity disorders through either holding her EX special attack or using her ultimate attack. Both of these at the end, if there is an anomaly on the enemy, will trigger a polarity disorder. Now I want to explain sort of briefly how exactly this disorder works, or just in general how disorders work, for people to understand. Anomaly mechanics in this game are very poorly documented, at least from my experience. I've always just had to ask other people for help. But basically, the way disorder works is, let's say character A, let's say Grace, builds anomaly meter all the way, and then you want to trigger a disorder by triggering corruption with Nicole. So you're using Nicole to trigger disorder on Grace's shock. Now the disorder, even though Nicole is the one triggering it, is not going to look at Nicole's stats. It's going to look at Grace's, because the way a disorder and in general anomalies work is that it looks at the stats that were used to make that anomaly. So if Grace creates the shock anomaly, and that anomaly is the one that gets disordered, the disorder damage will be looking at Grace's stats that she had when she built that shock. Now what this means for Yanagi is her polarity disorder will do more damage if she is triggering it on a clean shock aura. Now what is a clean shock aura? A clean shock aura is one that she was able to build fully by herself and doesn't have a bunch of shock built up from Rina or Harumasa. This leads to the synergy between these two not being the greatest, as you don't want to build Harumasa for anomaly, obviously. And you're going to end up with a Yanagi that has polarity disorders that do absolutely no damage. Now you can kind of bypass this by basically getting a fresh aura, basically shocking twice before you do your polarity disorder. But this is an absurd amount of field time, and I just don't find that generally to be worth it when you're trying to run Harumasa here. And now, with Grace, the way Grace functions is, Grace is an anomaly character, standard anomaly character, it's been here since the beginning of the game. Her focus is mono shock. You can run her in disorder, but her main intended purpose has always been mono shock. The way Grace functions, if you look at her ability, is that she makes your shock ticks just do more damage outright. If I do a side-by-side comparison of Yanagi's shock and Grace's shock, both on the exact same build, on the exact same engine, with the exact same scenario, on the exact same enemy, you'll see that Grace's shocks just hit harder. Now, Grace doesn't have a disorder attached to each shock, sure, but you get what I mean. Grace's shock ticks are just naturally higher. So the idea of playing Grace is bring her in to build a strong shock, and then you just utilize the damage from that shock for your rotation. The original intended core for this was like Grace, Rina, Anton, like way back in the day, which wasn't great because it's Grace, Rina, Anton, but that's the idea. Grace is a mono shock enabler for the most part, whereas Yanagi is a polarity disorder carry. Now, if you want to bring these two into a Harumasa team, it's not going to work exactly the same. Grace, being the shock enabler that she is going to let you simply trigger your shock, have the ticks go as you do your rotation, and you can do your Harumasa stuff. Grace isn't here to be on field for any disorders or any ultimates, really. Like, there's nothing that Grace really wants to do once that shock is up. Once that shock is live and it's doing damage, that's all, her job is done. Now Yanagi, when you play Yanagi with Harumasa, Yanagi can also bring a shock online so Harumasa can do his stuff, but what Yanagi wants to do is do her own damage. So you run into this issue with Yanagi Harumasa, where they're both kind of fighting for field time. They both want to do their own stuff, and if both of them are kind of like half-assedly doing their things, neither of them is going to do the greatest. Now, I do think Yanagi Haru is definitely an okay team. I don't think it's necessarily that much worse than Grace Harumasa. It's different. If your Harumasa is M0, Yanagi is potentially better than Grace, just outright, simply because Harumasa at M0 has less dashes, which just gives Yanagi more time to do her stuff anyway. Now, what that ends up doing, however, is if you run Yanagi with M0 Harumasa, you're basically just playing a Yanagi team and sometimes bringing in Harumasa to do a couple dashes. If you were to look at a sheet that shows you the damage distribution in this team, it's basically just all Yanagi, with Harumasa being like a little bit of the damage. It is basically just you playing carry Yanagi, but without the second support, and you're playing Harumasa instead. Now, Yanagi Haru is technically fine. It does sufficient damage in both Deadly Assault and the Shiyu defense. It'll do alright, but it's kind of an anti-synergistic team for the reasons that I stated. You can play them, but they will be kind of fighting for field time, or if they're not fighting for field time, you're either wasting a ton of damage on Yanagi, or you're wasting a ton of damage on Harumasa. If Harumasa is M1 and you're doing all of his dashes, your Yanagi's disorders are going to hit like fucking wet noodles. If your Harumasa is M0 and he's doing less dashes, you're basically just playing Yanagi carry, but without a second support that would just make her do more damage. And you're just not doing any dashes on Harumasa, so you're gonna end up just not having a fun time on either of the characters. Now, I did some testing, just to kind of get some rough idea. By the way, I am not great at playing Yanagi. I barely use this character. I forget I have her sometimes, so this is not the best showing. But to be fair, I also decided to take my worst ever Grace run, and put it side by side, just so it's a little more fair. The worst I've ever played Grace was 46,000, I think, 47,000. just to kind of put it side by side. But yeah, I think Grace just synergizes a little bit better with Harumasa. Yeah, the thing with Yanagi, again, I kind of tried to do both. I tried runs where I played Yanagi mostly on field and swapped in Harumasa sometimes, and then I just played Yanagi as a shock enabler and did mostly Harumasa things. Both got around the same score. I got a bit better with just using Harumasa because my Harumasa is really high invested. But the difference wasn't that big. It's basically just the same thing. I did a bunch of runs and none of them really got higher than 45,000. None of them. I think the highest I got was 44,000 point something. I'm sure, and I did misplay in all of those. I mean, I think I missed a bunch of disorders because I used this Yanagi's EX too early, and I can definitely improve those runs, but I don't think I'm gonna improve them to be over 50k or anything. I just don't think that's happening. Not with my investment, at least. And I mean, my Yanagi is using the same disc as my Grace, and spoiler alert, my discs on Grace they're pretty good. They're pretty good. Both of them are Core F, of course. Both of them hold their skills leveled as they should. Like, I think the build comparison is super fair. You're using the exact same build. Now, getting more in depth into the different synergies between these two options and why I think Grace is just a lot nicer to use here. Yanagi doesn't have really fast access to heavies. Now, what are heavies? Certain attacks in this game have heavy attacks attached to them, and what heavy attacks do is they're needed to trigger a bunch of different things. For example, an impair on a leg can only happen once the leg is taking enough damage and it gets hit by a heavy attack. All of Harumasa's dash attacks are heavy attacks, as an example. You also need a heavy attack to trigger a chain attack once the bar is flashing. Grace has access to an incredibly fast heavy in her EX, which is almost instant if you're really close, and her regular special grenades. Every single grenade she throws counts as a heavy, even the grenades in her basic attack string. So Grace has access to a really fast heavy, which allows you to do very quick and snappy combos, which you see when I play the team and I get to the stun. Yanagi doesn't really have that. Yanagi's fastest heavy option is her stance change, which isn't super fast and it's kind of random to toss out. So it leads to slightly more wasted time on your combos. Alternatively, her other heavy options are just using your EX or using your ultimate, but those aren't exactly fast. And yeah, in the stun window, because Grace does not give two shits about stun, really, outside of just having the shock do more damage, you can just fully focus on Harumasa. With Yanagi, her disorders sit really hard in stun, so you kind of won on field Yanagi, and then once again you have the issue of, well, Haru wants to do his however many dash combo, Yanagi wants to drop her 1 million whatever disorders, and it's just a mess trying to manage both, and you're gonna end up having either both doing nothing, or one doing a lot, and the other not doing really anything, and it's just really awkward how it pans out. Another reason that I like Grace over Yanagi is how the team rotates. This team doesn't really have access to a good support set. You're kind of just between Swing Jazz Rina, which doesn't have very good uptime because you don't want to use her chain attack. Astral Voice, Rina doesn't really have very fast quick assist options. She has her ultimate, but I mean, if you're just using the ultimate, you might as well run Swing Jazz. And her EX is fairly slow until it triggers a quick assist. Like, the nice thing about Rina is that you can kind of use her as this, like, zero field time support where you just swap her in super fast between your actions like I do. But if you're waiting for your EX or a quick assist, it's slowing down your rotation for 1 stack of Astral. 1. So unless you're actively trying to get hit during your rotation a bunch of times to get Astral, I just don't think it's worth running at all. So the only real support upset option you have is Proto-Punk, for which you need to do assists, and the buff lasts for 10 seconds. The buff is nice, but it's a very short duration. And now the very nice thing about Grace is that she has one of the best, probably the best evasive assist in the game. It's incredibly quick, it has a fair amount of build-up, as I've already talked about this before, but Grace has a really nice assist that you like to toss in for your rotation, because it's quick and it does what you want it to do. If you're on Yanagi instead, your assist option becomes her defensive assist, which isn't the best against this boss specifically, because this boss has a bunch of attacks that like stun you, if that makes sense. Like super heavy parry attacks just don't let you do a follow-up. UCC has a bunch of those, and in general it's kind of slow to do a defensive assist. And Rena's assist is the worst assist in the game. Rena's assist is so bad you never want to use it. It's optimal to get the assist, you get the flash, cancel it with a dash, and then just use special or something, whatever. Rena's assist is horrible. At least you can use Rena's assist like trigger, and that will trigger Proto-Punk. But just spamming Rina assist over and over again feels a bit awkward. You're kind of just wasting time, essentially. You're kind of just getting Proto-Punk for the sake of getting Proto-Punk. You're not getting anything else out of it. With Grace, you're getting Proto-Punk, and you're also getting everything you want from that assist. So, both because of the support set, synergies with field time, in general how the kits work out for the characters, and then heavies, I just find Grace to be a much more synergistic character with Harumasa. However, the thing about Grace, the problem with Grace is that she doesn't really do damage. She does not have those big baboom disorders, she doesn't. All her damage comes from shock, and her shocks are very weakened because of Harumasa. I mean, the highest I've seen is like 70,000, which isn't awful, like that's fine, it's free damage in the end, but it's not amazing. Yeah, the issue with Grace is that she's not going to be carrying your damage. Yanagi can carry your damage if your Harumasa isn't very strong. If your Harumasa isn't M1, Grace Haru does still function. I did talk about that in the guide, and I did show with the Astra team. Like, you can run Grace Haru with M0 Haru. However, because Haru has so many less dashes, it's just a lot less damage than if you did have Haru M1, and if Haru isn't on field for that long, you're not getting that much out of Grace, and then you might be better off just running Yanagi. So in that case, if you have a Yanagi lying around that isn't, for whatever reason, playing in a better team with Miyabi or other supports, sure, you can play her with your M0 Haru, and it's going to be fine. It's probably going to be better than with Grace. But if your Haru is M1 or higher, I just think Grace is gonna be better for you, because Grace allows high investment Haru to really shine. But yeah, that's about it. I kind of just wanted to show. I wanted to talk about the different options, why I prefer to use Grace, the issues with running Yanagi. I mean, ultimately, the thing with Yanagi is that you can run Yanagi has so many like teams where she's like actually doing stuff in, and she's really good. Like literally, if you run Yanagi Arena and then instead of Harumasa you run Lucy, it's just better than trying to manage like a dual DPS team. It is just going to be more damage. And obviously Yanagi plays with the best DPS in the game, Miyabi. Yanagi can play with other anomalies. Yeah, Bernice, basically just Bernice. That's also better. So I feel like Yanagi just has better teams to be in, whereas Grace doesn't really have that. Grace isn't... I mean, you can play, like, Grace Rina Miyabi, it's gonna work. It's gonna be good anyway, because it's Miyabi. Grace is not a character that's in high demand for your teams. Like, Grace Rina is something you can very easily just slot into the Haru team, and you're not gonna be like, oh man, I wish I had Grace with my Miyabi. Oh, I wish I had Grace with my Bernice. Like, no, it's not gonna happen. So, just from the team building perspective, and all the synergies that these two characters have, I just prefer Grace Harumasa over Yanagi Harumasa. But both technically do work, and you will see fine results with both. But yeah, I personally am just a Grace enjoyer as well, so. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful to you guys. I will maybe try and get 52,000, a better score with Grace Harumasa and Deadly Assault, but I mean, after editing that shit for 3 hours, whew, man, doing it again. Fun. Anyway, see you guys, have a good one.